Holy shike, let's talk about pigs. Here's your host of the Pork Podcast, Jennifer Shike.
There's just something about the story behind the story. And as a storyteller, I'm always searching for ways to give readers just a little bit more. And that's what the Pork Podcast is all about, bringing you stories of the people and the progress of the pork industry. I'm Jennifer Shike. Let's go find just a little bit more.
At United Animal Health, we all share a love for animals. We have devoted our lives to agriculture and to the well-being and productivity of animals. With our guiding principle to always have the best answer, we listen to the animal and let the animal tell us what works and what doesn't. We know that if the animal is healthy and productive, so is the producer, the consumer, and our communities. Learn more at unitedanh.com.
He's a champion of the pig, and when Dr. Clayton Johnson steps on the stage, everyone stops and listens. One of my favorite people to go listen to talk at a conference is always Dr. Johnson because he speaks with such a passion and an urgency in his voice. There's no doubt that he loves pork production, that he cares about pork producers, and that his priority is the pig. And so I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Clayton Johnson to the Pork Podcast today to talk about pigs.
Thank you, Jennifer. That is a beautiful introduction. I don't know that I have earned any of that, but that person you described sounds like a wonderful human being, and I'll try to live up to that expectation going forward.
Well, I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about biosecurity with as much passion as you have. And I'll never forget you described it once as like a fortress and a castle. And I thought, well, this guy can make anything sound interesting and fun. And so I applaud you for that. And, I just want to start off our conversation today by kind of getting a little bit of a lay of the land. How are pork producers feeling right now? What are some of the things that you're hearing in the pork industry?
I would say it's a little bit of a paradox. You talk to some folks and the conversations are fantastic, especially when it comes to industry profitability. We're staring at a year right now where we expect good returns. And to be blunt, everybody needed that. Producers, allied industry. It's been a really tough couple of years, and all of our collective balance sheets in the industry needed some equity infusion, and it's happening, and it looks like it's forecasted to happen. Paradox on the profitability piece. It's kind of seems like it's one of those things where we need a little bit of a black swan event to make that worse, right? We would need something dramatically to change with costs or revenues to make that worse. And normally we would say, well, that's small risk, right? Black swan events don't happen. But I've lived through a whole bunch of black swan events the last few years, So whether it would be foreign animal disease, trade disruptions, massive changes in our cost of production structure. Normally we think of those things as that could happen, right? But it's a black swan event. But unfortunately, we've seen those things happen. So everybody is, I would say, cautiously very optimistic about the profitability. For the folks you talk to that are maybe down in the dumps right now, it comes down to disease. You mentioned biosecurity before, and the reality is our pig farms, unfortunately, especially on the wean to finish side of the business, are not capable of keeping all the pathogens out that we would like to keep out, and we've seen a heck of a lot of disease transmission in the last few months. Folks that have seen that disease transmission are feeling the pain of it. So it's a paradox, right? The business side of things is good and needed to be good. And there's only one KPI at the end of the day in a business that's really the sustainability one for business function. And that is profitability, right? So that's a good thing, but folks are having to deal with some sick pigs, and then uncertainty about the future always kind of weighs over you.
Yeah. Well, it's been a very popular topic of conversation, PRRS. Everywhere I go, it's PRRS this, PRRS that. And, I was visiting with Dr. Lisa Beckton the other day, and she said that the April SDRS report shows the highest caseload of PRRS for since 2018 in the month of April. And so she said, it's real. It's out there. So talk to me a little bit about why are we seeing such an uptick in PRRS right now? Is it a more virulent strain? Can you give us just a little bit of the background on what's happening right now?
Yep. We certainly deal with virulent strains in the United States. I get to work with pig producers all over the world, and there are some other regions of the world that have tough PRRS strains, but there's nobody who has it any worse than what we do in the U.S. PRRS challenges have historically gone through waves, right? We have periods where the sky is falling, lots of farms are getting sick. Then after that, we build some collective herd immunity, right? The highest risk farms tend to get sick first. They build up some immunity, and eventually the virus kind of runs out of susceptible pigs to find, kind of like a fire that runs out of wood, right? And so you see that run through waves, but we're always producing new pigs, and especially in our wean to finish system, right? We're always pushing new pigs out there. So if we make healthy pigs for a while, it's kind of like building the fire pit up with dry wood. And then eventually it just takes a match to go in there and start a new fire. The timing, we're sitting here in June right now. The timing of seeing PRRS challenges still prolonging, not just from April and continuing to May, but talking to people this week, they're saying it's still going on. That's pretty unusual. But in my career, I've seen PRRS shift from let's say a November through January outbreak cycle to now it's much more prolonged. And really, it's kind of only June, July, and August that we rely on as the times where you don't see a lot of PRRS activity. This year, we're losing one of those 3 months that we had left. So we'll see where that goes. I think some of it is just the way kind of PRRS works, and it's cyclical, and we're in a bad part of the cycle. But it is unusual that the bad part of that cycle is happening right now in June. And man, we certainly hope that goes away here fairly soon.
In talking with different companies, there's, a lot of people are trying to figure out how can we help producers with this PRRS battle. What do you recommend? I know there's a lot of products out there. There's a lot of treatment plans. There's a lot of option A, B, and C. But what do you think is your best advice for producers battling PRRS?
Yep. I would say, number one, focus on biosecurity. You're going to be happiest if you aren't dealing with PRRS. The producers that I talk to that are happy with their PRRS situation don't have wild type PRRS impacting their farms right now. Producers that have wild type PRRS, even if they're optimizing the disease management side of it, are generally still frustrated with the consequences. Using all the tools we have, using them appropriately, people still look at it and say, "Man, I don't like these numbers." So a lot of times, if folks ask me to talk about PRRS management, they expect me to come up and vaccines and this treatment protocol and these SOPs, and the first thing I talk about is biosecurity. And they're like, "Well, we're going to talk about PRRS management." I'm like, "We are talking about PRRS management." As a veterinarian, I am blessed to get to go to farms. And there's a lot of folks in our industry that work in the industry, but they don't get to go to farms. And so the reason I'm so passionate about biosecurity is I see the downside of it. Nobody calls me up and says, "Clayton, come to the farm. Things are great." You know what I'm saying? Let's just go walk the barn together. So when I go to the farm, things are a challenge. And man, it is miserable for the people and pigs when you go into that situation. And the reality is it's a viral disease, right? I don't have an antibiotic I can come in and save the day with. So biosecurity. You got to look at your farm and be honest with yourself about your biosecurity capabilities. And what I mean by that is if you think you had a sow farm and you think maybe it's coming in through the air, well, you should consider air filtration. You absolutely should, but you need to button up all the other aspects of your biosecurity before you take that step. If you're not doing a good job with supply entry or mortality management, if you're still rendering your mortalities, we can't filter the farm. I mean, that's a level that we want to get to, but we got to check the box on some basics first. In our wean to finish facilities, the biggest problem is we can't really filter the air in a cost-effective way today. We could filter the air the same way we do in a sow farm, but the economics of it, the feasibility of doing so it's not practical or cost-effective to do today. So we need some better tools on the wean to finish side. But first and foremost, when it comes to PRRS, biosecurity, we've got to keep it out. It is just so devastating when it gets in that you're going to be unhappy with the results, even if you use a gold standard protocol and plan to try and manage the situation.
Have you been hearing about more producers I feel like I'm hearing more about rebreaks, like they've had it, they think they're past it, and then they're battling it again sooner than they thought.
Yep.
Do you think that window in between is shortening?
I think the rebreak situation definitely is a big challenge for us. And rebreak's a bit of a dangerous word because I don't know that there's a perfect definition of it. But when I say rebreak, a sow farm that has had an issue maybe 3, 4, 5 months ago, they're on the path to recovery and we think things are going really well. And then all of a sudden it's not going well again. Yeah. We see some challenges, and sometimes those challenges are at the sow farm and post-weaning. Sometimes it's maybe just post-weaning. But one of the challenges with PRRS is really creating good and lasting immunity. It's not a situation we have perfectly figured out on the sow farm. We know that the sows will clear the virus, particularly from their bloodstream, really fast. But when they go back through that farrowing house, they become immunocompromised, and then they've got a whole bunch of little baby pigs that may be shedding the virus right next to them for the next 3 to 4 weeks, and it's kind of a vicious cycle where they can become reinfected, unfortunately. And the dynamics of our production flow make that difficult to manage. So we have a big challenge with the rebreaks. Unfortunately, we can't really predict them very well. We do know that some lineages are a little bit more susceptible to it. So if you're not sequencing your PRRS strain, that's probably the best first step, is say, what strain do I have? What lineage does it fit in? And then work with your veterinarian to say, is this one where we tend to have these rebreaks more often? We may not be able to prevent it, but if we can project it, we can maybe better manage that situation, at least not be surprised by it, and be ready to go with whatever steps we're going to take.
Well, what are some of the, there's a new tool that's out there or at least been announced. It's not quite out there yet, but let's talk a little bit about the PRRS resistant pig. FDA's approval. I mean, that's a big announcement.
Yeah.
I think we know that that's not something that's going to happen overnight, that there's a timeline for this, but talk to us a little bit about, do you think there's an opportunity for these types of tools to help us out in the fight against PRRS?
Absolutely. 100%. The disease resistance through gene editing is a breakthrough technology for our industry and for many industries. The science is pretty clear that this is going to be a technology that can help us dramatically with PRRS. Some people may say, well, I don't know if it'll be perfect. Don't worry about that. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, don't let best be the enemy of better. It looks like it's really, really, really helpful right now. None of us know what the future holds, but it's a no-brainer technology to fix what is our biggest disease problem in the United States year after year after year. So I'm super excited about the technology part of it. I feel ecstatic that the FDA approved it, because that was the first big milestone, and we can't get through any of the other milestones until we get through that one. So fantastic that they approved it. We need to get some of our trading partners to approve it as well, before commercial producers are going to be, let's call it, allowed to use it, right? And then we need to get retail to not put any barriers on us using that product. Sure. And I'll be honest with you, it's not in my line of work to really estimate what are going to be the challenges with approval in other countries. What's going to be the retail's, take on this? Nobody asked me my opinion on that. I certainly hope we can get over those milestones. I go back to what I said before. Having PRRS on your farm is just a miserable experience for the pigs and the people. And if we have scientific tools that are safe and efficacious that we can use, man, I would hate to think that we wouldn't be able to use it. So we get through those milestones and we can deploy it. It's awesome. The last message I have for producers is be ready when you can deploy it, because it's not just flip a switch and your pigs become PRRS resistant. Right. You're going to have to work through your supply chain, starting with your purebred animals and then making your commercial gilts that then make your commercial pigs that are PRRS resistant. And that's going to take years for most producers. So you don't want to be behind the adoption curve if it's technology you're interested in and you get the thumbs up that, okay, we can use this thing.
Okay. Do you think that technology is a technology that can be translated to other diseases? Do you think we'll see that in the future?
Absolutely. There's a lot of different ways to attack diseases. Diseases they work at a microscopic level, so we don't see it with our eyes, but the reality is a virus has to infect a cell, right? Generally a bacteria has to produce a toxin, and think of it as a battle versus good guys and bad guys, right? The good guys have some weapons, the viruses have some weapons. If we can come up with a way to mask those weapons or to keep the bad guys out of our castle, there are many different ways gene editing can help us. We really have just scratched the surface on what it can do for us, and not just for PRRS, but really for many pathogens that we deal with.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things that I love so much about this industry is just the science and the technology and people's willingness to embrace it and try things and change. We're not going to know unless we take some of these big steps forward. So,
yep.
Kind of brings me to my next question. I've heard a little bit about kind of this push to have a national swine health strategy. And I was just curious if you could share your thoughts on why do we really need a national swine health strategy? There's so many programs going on. And I've only been at Farm Journal Pork for not quite 7 years. And, we've seen a lot moving in the last 7 years. And we have a lot of different things moving. It's exciting. Where does the National Swine Health Strategy fit into that?
Yep, that's a great question. I think it can have a lot of value for producers. I think we can look at the poultry industry as an example of an industry that has utilized, let's call it collaborative disease monitoring and control programs, and utilize them very successfully for endemic diseases where they just want to manage them and keep the disease impact low, and then also for diseases that they want to completely get rid of and take away as a concern, completely eradicate from our herds. So I think there's a model there. There's an analogy that we can replicate and do some good. And again, don't let best be the enemy of better. Let's pick some specific diseases that are low hanging fruit to start with. And you think about a disease like PED. We do have lots of programs out there. We have lots of wonderful support functions. You mentioned Dr. Lisa Beckton, and she has worked with the SHIC group, and SHIC's role is to produce information, right? So they give us a lot of information on how to manage and maybe even eradicate PED. Right. But SHIC's mission is not to lead an eradication strategy. And when you think of a national disease eradication strategy, right, which one of our groups or, acronyms, so to say, would have the role, responsibility, authority to lead that? We don't really have that today. And so I think we either need to provide one of the groups with that resource, or we need somebody that can help coordinate our collective resources. And that's going to be easier said than done. It'll require a lot of buy-in from producers. It'll require funding for sure. But I think, there's huge opportunities for us to do that. You tend to fall to the lowest common denominator when it comes to disease. And what I mean by that is if Jennifer's pig farm is super healthy and Clayton's pig farm across the road is not super healthy, eventually Jennifer's pig farm becomes like Clayton's pig farm. Nobody's pig farm cleans up because the neighbor is really healthy. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But lots of people's pig farm gets sick because the neighbor's really healthy. And even if you got great biosecurity, right? Even if Jennifer's state of the art, there's going to be a mistake, right? There's going to be a crack in our castle at some point in time that we just can't overcome. So it's in all of our best interest to work together on disease management, lower the disease burden. Life is so much more fun when you are raising healthy pigs.
It sure is. Well, one of the diseases that I feel like we heard so much about for so long that got kind of quiet for a while, and now it's resurging again is PED. You just brought it up. So what are you seeing when it comes to PED out there?
Really high wean pig prices in June. And when wean pig prices are really high in June, there's really only one reason for that generally, and it's disease. People need pigs to fill in gaps. And PRRS is painful, but in the immediate term, PED is more painful in terms of all the pigs that you lose. The MSHIMP report has been pretty clear that there's been a lot of PED transmission in the last couple of months. And it looks like it's still kind of like PRRS continuing here into June. That's concerning. I know there's been some folks that have had a harder time getting PED out of their farms from last year's infection. There's been some talk about that. We're not in a situation that's anything like 2013, 2014. So this is not a situation where half of the sows in the U.S. are dealing with this, but more than have in years. In the last couple of months, the outbreak rate has been pretty steep and more than we've seen in a long time. To me, it says that there are still opportunities out there at the individual farm level when it comes to biosecurity. None of these pathogens are magic, right? They don't just magically appear in the farm. They come in somehow, some way, someone, something, the feed, the water, the air, all of it is a risk. Everything that comes into that farm is a risk. And somehow, some way, PED is riding along and coming into these farms. And it's a shame, but it's an opportunity and it's one we can't hide from. We got to go try to address it.
Do you think it's possible to eradicate PED from the U.S.? And if it is, what are some of the challenges in us getting there, or what's holding us back from achieving that?
Yep. So I think one of the first challenges is the lack of an overarching organization or a group that has the ability and the resources to lead that effort. I think we would need to have some organization that probably doesn't exist today that has the authority, the credibility, and the resources to say, this is the plan. This is how we will measure the plan. here is how we will react to positive farms, right? With pseudorabies eradication, as I understand it, we had a very solid plan, and you can still find that plan. It's written, and we had the government support in that program, and it really took the government support to get it to the finish line. I don't know that today we're probably going to get that with PED. I don't know that the government's going to come in and say, hey, if a farm won't test for PED, we'll let the sheriff go out with the veterinarian and tell them you're going to test one way or the other. I don't know that that's going to happen, but we need somebody that can coordinate it. The other thing I would say is we need some pretty loose scope definition early on. And what I mean by that is there are certain folks that are going to be very resistant to getting rid of PED. Specifically, there are some producers that still expose their gilts to PED because they say, well, I need to have antibodies because my farm is probably going to get infected. They're probably not going to be on board day one with stopping that practice. Okay. And then the other group of folks would probably be the show pig industry, right? Having somebody in the show pig industry and saying, hey, we got to depopulate your herd because you got PED. Well, if your herd is 10 pigs that are for the county fair, that's a really rough situation. So from my perspective, don't worry about those. We should go to the commercial industry, wean to market. That's where we need to demonstrate that we can keep PED out, get through at least a winter, ideally maybe 2 winters where we have clean packing plants, clean finishing flows. Then we can go back to those folks that are exposing their gilts and say, okay, look, the risk is not there that used to be there, right? We've mitigated the risk you're worried about with exposing the gilts. And so let's take the gilt exposure thing offline at that point. I actually don't think the gilt exposure is a massive risk collectively to the industry. People are doing that in very biosecure locations, right? It's their gilts. They're putting them in really good biosecure barns. And it's a small number of animals generally in a very controlled situation compared to a massive wean to market site that all the pigs get PED at the same time. It creates a ton of virus. And then I think same thing with the show pig folks. You could go to them at that point and say, look, we think the risk is kind of not there right now. So can at some point in a forgiving time of the year, generally the warmer months in the summer, can we do some sort of a collective program to try and reduce the pressure there? So a lot to do, right? We need somebody to coordinate it. We need a reasonable scope at the beginning that is really focused on marketing and our harvest facilities, those specific aspects. And then if we demonstrate that we can knock it out of there, then I think we start to pick fruit higher up on the tree. We go to the other farms that are maybe using PED exposure as a tool. Folks that maybe are going to be resistant at first, we can show them some evidence and say, we think the boogeyman is not out there and as big of a risk anymore. You're the last boogeyman left. Unfortunately, you now are the biggest risk. Can we eliminate you so that we get this thing to the finish line?
Yeah. Sounds like a battle, but it sounds like one that has a path forward. And I mean, I think with all these diseases, there's, the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. And one of the things that we talked a lot about this winter at the AASV meeting and different trade shows I was at was H5N1.
Yep.
And so, I bring it up because I think people think, well, it's not in the commercial swine herd. We don't need to really worry about it. We've got enough other things to worry about right now. How likely do you think it is that we could get, an H5N1 strain in our swine herd?
Yep. Great question. And the reality is it has happened in Oregon the one time, right?
Right.
Unique situation, not a commercial farm. And as I understand it, direct migratory wildlife contact with outdoor pigs. But I think that's proof of concept that it can happen, right? And so our domestic pigs that we've got in barns, they are at risk. Just like I said, everything that comes in that barn is a risk factor. The water, if you're bringing in surface water, those migratory birds, they're landing on those ponds, right? In some ways, Jennifer, I won't lie, I'm a little surprised that we have avoided seeing this. With as many dairies as have been infected, with as much virus as how to be blunt is out there in milk, right? I mean, there's a lot of pig farms that aren't very far from a dairy. Maybe even some workers that, you work at a dairy, you work at a pig farm, right? So I've been very surprised we haven't seen it. I'm happily surprised, and I hope we don't see it. I think we need to use this downtime, so to say, to develop our contingency plans. And I give the American Association of Swine Veterinarians a lot of credit on this. I know Dr. Hollis on our team, he's been involved in chatting with folks at the regulatory level to say, all right, what does a plan look like if and when a pig farm does become infected? We really want to put together a plan that, helps to protect the risk to pig health, to public health, but also is practical and feasible. The reality is, if pigs get infected with this virus, as I understand it, when they've done that experimentally, it's not some Frankenstein disease or African swine fever where all the pigs die. They get influenza. So they're not going to be ridiculously sick. The dairies don't depopulate. And so I think that's a reasonable discussion to have and say, okay, historically, we've kind of thought with high path AI that we'd have to depopulate our pig barns. But if the pigs aren't going to get sick, if we're not really documenting a lot of human transmission from the dairies that are all infected and the dairies aren't depopulating, why would you have a pig farm that's across the road from a dairy? The pig farm gets it from where, right? And the dairy doesn't have to depopulate, but the pig farm has to depopulate.
Right.
And I understand there's a lot of nuance in that, and there needs to be a lot of discussion about that. But I really applaud folks for taking that initiative and trying to play those discussions out so that we have a practical, science-based plan to address this and help mitigate risk across the board, but also one that can be implemented.
Yeah. So I just feel like I still need to go here. I mean, African swine fever, we haven't talked about it as much lately. It's kind of quieter in some ways. I'm still seeing reports of it all over the world. So talk to me. Is it something we can kind of worry about less right now? And why or why not?
Yep. You know, I hate to, I feel scared to say this, but worry about it less than we have, say, over the last, 5 to 7 years. I say, maybe a little bit. And I say that specifically because we've worried about it a lot. And not just worry about it. We've done things. We have developed response plans, right? We've put together our approach, our plan of attack. And so if we hadn't done those things, I would say, no, keep worrying about it. It is absolutely still out there. In Europe, it continues to cause problems for them. And unfortunately, there aren't many success stories of countries once they become infected of kind of retaking their country and going back to being ASF naive, which is what our goal would be. So that's our goal, that's our plan, but there's not a lot of examples out there of other folks that have been able to successfully do that.
Yeah.
It's alive and well. I feel like we've done a lot of good work to prepare for it. We've gone through probably the period of peak risk from my perspective. And I say that because a lot of the world's pigs in Asia went from being completely susceptible to ASF to then now infected. And like we talked about with PRRS before, right? The pigs that have survived, they have some immunity. And that immunity, that herd level immunity, slows down the transmission of disease a little bit. In 2018, 2019, there were probably times where, a crazy percentage of the world's pork meat was contaminated with ASF. A ridiculous percentage of the world's pork meat contaminated with ASF. And we survived that time. And today, I would estimate that less of the world's pork meat is contaminated with ASF than what it was. So from that perspective, I think our risk is a little bit lower. However, it's a catastrophic event, so we really can't tolerate any risk, and we've got to continue to put some resources towards it. I know it's easy to have fatigue, but we got to continue to keep our eye on PED or on ASF.
And just to clarify, even though it maybe was meat that had been contaminated with ASF, no risk to human health, no food safety concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. For humans, there's no concern whatsoever, and that's a blessing and a curse.
Right.
And I say that's a blessing because we don't really have to have concerns about the meat. It's a curse because in some of those endemic countries, when they get ASF, they just slaughter the pigs. And so that pushes that meat right out there into the marketplace, and ASF unfortunately persists in that meat and is infectious to pigs for a long, long time. And it's a big part of the transmission cycle.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I try to do in every podcast is just do a little background on you and find out what maybe a colleague or a family member or friend has to say about you. And I talked to Dr. Bill Hollis, who you mentioned earlier, and I said, what do you appreciate most about Dr. Johnson? And he says that you are really unique because of your ability to communicate so effectively. He said, Dr. Johnson is a strong scientist with athletic level competitiveness. That was pretty nice. And yet he can communicate effectively with everyone he meets. And you serve as the technical leader of your team of 12 veterinarians at Carthage Veterinary Service and 6 animal scientists. I didn't realize that you kind of served over them as well. And he said that each one of you or each one on that team is able to have like an individual conversation with you about their concerns, their challenges, the things that they're working on, and that everybody just really values that time with you, which he says means so much to him. So, I am fortunate. And like I said, when I think of you, I think fabulous communicator. And when Dr. Hollis said the same thing, we're not lying. You really are very good at it. And I wonder, you talked a little bit about this, I think, at AASV, but why is it so important to be able to be a good communicator? Because one might think as a veterinarian, you can just kind of go do your thing and take care of the pigs. But why have you focused so much on being a good communicator and getting even better at it?
You know, I think my environment has been the biggest piece of being a good communicator. Starting when I was a kid, I had a grandpa that was very influential to me and a great role model. And he told me when I was early age, he said, you know, really focus on your reading, your language classes in school, because communication is absolutely critical. And I didn't really like reading, and I didn't like writing as a class, so I didn't love that. I loved to read. I loved to read books, but I didn't really like the classes. You know, I was more into the science classes and math and stuff. But anyway, so that was pretty influential. And then I have just kind of lucked into situations throughout my career where I have had mentors that were fantastic communicators. At the University of Illinois, Dr. Larry Firkins. I mean, that guy is an amazing communicator. And I don't know that he ever sat down with me and said, Clayton, here's how you give a talk, or here's how you have a conversation with somebody. But you just soak up that, you know, that information and that knowledge and just kind of monkey see, monkey do, right? So Dr. Firkins at the Mashoffs, that place was loaded with amazing communicators, starting with Ken Mashoff. I mean, he's an amazing presenter. Ken's ability to talk to people in the audience. And I always enjoyed this, where he will call people out by name as he's talking. And it will be not just random, right? He will talk to Jennifer when there's a talking point that's important to Jennifer. So in a room full of people, he makes you feel valued. Oh man, like watching him give talks at grower meetings and things like that, I soaked all that up. Bradley Walters, Jason Logston, right? There were so many people that were fantastic communicators. And I got a lot of opportunities to practice giving presentations when I was there. Going to Carthage, right? Dr. Hollis is a fantastic communicator. Similar to what he said about me. I mean, if I have learned anything from him, it is meet people where they're at, right? You know, go talk to them about the issues that they have. Try to view it through their lens. Try to understand what challenges they're feeling, and understand that sometimes people can't communicate that very effectively, especially in an emotional situation. Sometimes you have to look for inference and you have to read body language, and it may not be the words that are coming out of their mouth, but you have to try and respect that situation, and you've got to try and, again, meet them where they're at. And even if it's not the way you see the situation, you're not going to communicate effectively with them until you are able to appreciate their perspective, right? Yeah. People talk past each other when I'm talking about what I want to get done or how I see it, and you're talking about how you see it, and it's two sides of a coin, right? We're both looking at the same coin, but I'm talking about the heads, you're talking about the tails, and both of us think that each other is an idiot because we're describing two different things. The world is three-dimensional, and the more people you can interact with, the more lenses that you can obtain. You can stack those lenses on top of each other. Your viewpoint is 2D, right? You just see through two dimensions, but if you can stack other lenses on top of it, you can start to see a bigger picture, and you can start to see collective realities, things that we as a group all believe, and those anchors you can go back to when you can communicate. You know, things like castles, stuff like that, where it's like, okay, that castle thing came because I like Game of Thrones, and a lot of people have seen Game of Thrones, right? So it was an easy talking point. When I'm talking about biosecurity on pig farms, a lot of times I'll use the game Hot Lava, talking about the clean dirty line, right? Because everybody played Hot Lava when you were a kid, right? You know, don't touch the tile or don't touch the carpet. And so when the truck backs up to the chute, Hot Lava, right? It's the same game. And so again, you know, meet people where they're at, communicate in a language that is meaningful for them. When I'm in a boardroom talking to somebody that has millions of dollars invested in pig production, I don't talk about Hot Lava, right? I use language that is meaningful to that person. But at the end of the day, I think it's trying to figure out how to be a little bit less concerned about how you want to communicate and being open to communicate however the other person wants to communicate.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what I see in really successful teams in barns. I was thinking about too, like, you do get so much time in barns, you know what makes a successful team. One of the things that I've witnessed when I go into barns and I'm talking to these barn heroes that we've been featuring, people who do outstanding things in the barn and really know how to bring a team along, it really starts with this ability they have to make every single person on their team feel seen. And I remember that I was at your conference. It was maybe one of the first events that I went to. And you guys talked about somebody, and I'm not, I think I remember his name, but I'm not going to go there. But somebody who was working in a barn, and one of the things that you guys said was the reason that he was winning that award was because he took the time to look everyone in the eye and shake their hand and tell them good morning every day. that's not a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But we live in a world that just sees right past people all the time.
Yep.
And so I really applaud what you're saying. I think it's so important. What else do you see makes strong teams in the barn?
Great question. Communication, communication is absolutely critical. And I think a lot of times good teams are going to have a good leader that starts every day in the barn with some sort of team communication. Especially in a sow farm, it's very common that Jennifer works in breeding, Clayton works in farrowing, and we may see each other in the morning and at lunch, but other than that, we don't work together. But having an understanding of what's going on and having perspective about the challenges that Jennifer's having and the challenges that Clayton's having, right? It just helps to maybe give some forgiveness when there is a challenge and it's easy to point the finger at somebody else. So let's say that Jennifer's responsibility is bringing the bred animals into the farrowing room and loading the farrowing room. And Clayton's responsibility is setting the feeders after those animals have been brought in the farrowing room. And it's 2:00 and I expected the animals to be loaded, but they're not loaded today. Well, it's easy for me to sit there and say, man, what do we always say? Jennifer doesn't want to work hard. Right? Jennifer's lazy. She just doesn't get it, right? That's our natural human tendency. But if I know Jennifer's down 2 people today, or if I know Jennifer's got, twice as many second breeds as normal, right? Well, now I'm sitting there and I'm saying, oh, it's time to go get those sows. I know Jennifer's got a lot going on today. Maybe I should just go start that, right?
Yeah.
So I think communication is really important, starting every day with a very quick update on what's going on the farm. What are the key things we need to get done? What are the likely disruptors? What are the likely things that are going to happen today that are going to change our plan? And helping everybody to understand that we're all in this together, common goals, and then you got to be focused on the goals. I do think that is an opportunity for our industry. Sometimes you think about our metrics reports, right? Coming out of a pig farm, a lot of times there's 400 metrics on the report, and we get very focused on sub-optimizing each one of those individual metrics. At the end of the day, profitability has to be there, and then we really need to take care of our people, right? So you've got to focus on what specifically are we going to get done today. Farming is waking up with a to-do list and then all day rearranging the to-do list, right? It doesn't matter whether you're farming crops or pigs or any type of critter. So you got to appreciate we're not going to empty the to-do list today. We're not going to get everything knocked off of it. We got to continually push our resources towards the most important thing on that to-do list and make sure the whole team knows what that is, so that I'm not working on number 10 on this to-do list because it's my favorite thing to do when we don't have 1, 2, and 3 anywhere near being done. Collectively, maybe number 10 is normally my responsibility, but I'm going to go work on number 1 and 2 and 3 because it's the most important thing to do, and it's the farthest from being done at that point.
Okay, that's so good. I don't want to stop our conversation. I know I need to get closing up here, but one thing I do want to talk to you about that is something that I think we both get pretty excited about is that next generation.
Yeah.
We both have kids that are kind of in that. Your youngest is 10, I think.
Yep,
Is that right?
10 and 14.
And my oldest just turned 19. So we kind of got this range.
Yeah.
We're all in between there. And so they're thinking about jobs and they're thinking about pathways. I think there are so many amazing opportunities in the pork industry that if you have a passion for pigs or you have a passion for animals, there's a lot of really great potential here. But I'm not sure we do the greatest job of telling everybody about all the jobs that there are.
Yeah.
And I think we like to make excuses like, well, if you don't want to work in a barn, that's okay. But working in a barn is a pretty sweet gig, really.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really great jobs in the barn.
Yep.
So I guess I just wanted to give you a couple minutes. Like if there's anybody out here listening who maybe is thinking about a career change or they have kids or they're a kid who's thinking about jobs, like why should people consider the pork industry?
Oh, I think you nailed it when you said there's so many opportunities. If you want to have a technical role, well, you can go get any number of degrees, right? You can be a nutritionist, you can be a veterinarian, you can be a geneticist, you can be an accountant, right? You can be an IT person. There are any number of technical fields where you can support the pork industry and do it in your own technical way. If you're not that interested in doing a lot of schooling, man, what an industry for you to be able to come in, start working on the ground level and work your way up to being a leader of a large organization. Most of the folks I know that are the COOs of pretty big production companies, they don't have some fancy degree. And their first job may have been like a technician, entry-level technician type job, but they're good people. They're extremely good learners. They work hard. They come to work every day with a good attitude. They're great leaders. And then they've had organizations that have given them development opportunities to continue to move up that totem pole. And I don't know a lot of other industries. I've been a kid in pigs my entire life. But I just don't think there's a lot of other industries that are out there where you can go from an entry level job and, move fairly rapidly up the totem pole all the way to the executive level. I think it's a very unique opportunity, and really regardless of your chosen educational path, there's opportunities for you to do whatever you want in the pork industry.
Mhm. Any closing thoughts that you may have for producers listening?
I would say disease is tough. When we talked about PRRS and PED, be honest with yourself. Those diseases are coming in, and they're coming in because we've got a biosecurity opportunity. The most important metric to measure your biosecurity is the number of disease outbreaks you have. And if you're having disease outbreaks, we got to make some changes. So work with your veterinarian, use the emotion in a positive way, right? And what I mean by that is it's time to make change. Let's be open to new ideas, and let's be open to better ways to try and prevent those bad diseases from coming in. Hang in there. If you've got challenges with disease right now, understand the industry, economic dynamics are in a wonderful place. So take good care of the pigs you got and look forward to a profitable year. We don't always get those, and man, it's nice to have one.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been so great to spend this time with you. And thank you for joining us as well. You can find more of the Pork Podcast on our Farm Journal's YouTube channel or anywhere that podcasts are found. Again, this is Jennifer Scheich, finding the story behind the story.